poster, but President Kagame, when we spoke in February, at the beginning, shortly after President Trump took over power, you said you supported the cuts to aid, that we as Africans have to be self-dependent. We can't rely on other people to fund our development. A lot more has happened since then that in some ways threaten our economic advantage as Africans. Do you still support largely what President Trump is doing in resetting our relationship with America and forcing us as Africans to step up?
Well, thank you, Rari. I think we have to put everything in a context. Whatever President Trump has decided, or whatever anybody else will decide in the near future, there is a history to how we've been going about things for decades as Africa. So it isn't like we should just wake up one morning and because of what somebody has done that affects us, we should have been building up the momentum in terms of what we need to do to make Africa self-dependent and resilient, and also in how Africa works with other continents and other countries. So that is the context. So in this case, it is as well that President Trump decided to do what he did, if that was only to add to many other reminders or things that should wake us up to, as Africa, be able to do what we ought to do. And there are many opportunities. We always talk about potential of our continent. But when do we realize really what this potential is all about in reality? I think that has always been the question. And that comes back to us as a continent, as a people of this continent, to take the bull by its horns and deal with the problem. So we can't keep depending on what others are saying or doing about us. We need to be working with each other and other countries on the global stage that offer what we need, and we as well offer what they need. I think this is the context.
You have been an advocate, President Kagame, of reforming the African Union. Is it, as currently set up, the vehicle for us, our aspirations as Africans, when, for instance, you've been critical of its role in mediating in the conflict that you have with your neighbor in the DRC, in the Rwanda process, in the Nairobi process, and the best results appear to have come from one meeting you had with President Tshisekedi in Qatar. So the African Union failed there and Qatar succeeded.
Well, I think there are several efforts going on at the same time. That's the problem. And even that one we are talking about, whether it is Qatar or the US, or we can't say we have succeeded. Everyone is trying. And again, it comes back to us, really. If you look at what we've been doing on our continent, much progress has been made. I think we can't say nothing has been done, generally. Whether it was to do with the reforms, and I think Africans have come together. They have defined things and speak with one voice increasingly. There is significant progress. But most of these developments that have been happening in the last decade, as I said, are reminders that there are things we need to do that we haven't done. So if you look at it at the African Union level, I remember when I was the champion of the reform process, there are things that were discussed on the continent. For example, the peace and security facility that was put in place. because it was put in place to avoid being fully dependent on external funders, because that has been the case. In fact, this is similar to what happens in other areas in different countries. We find we depend so much on the external partners and forget ourselves to put in place what we really have to do and can do. So that is progress. And then, so in terms of peace and security, and again, you look at the whole continent, you find there are many trouble spots in different areas. All kinds of efforts going on, back and forth, succeeding in some places, not succeeding in others, and continued efforts going on. Again, these are some of the areas, because of the past and how we have handled our own affairs, that we are all of a sudden reminded that we can't do all things by ourselves,
Right.
and revert to these partners. In other words, in any case, it doesn't, even if we're able to do things ourselves, we still have to bring in partners who have what to offer.